My name is Dia Sayed. I'm a student at the King's University. I've been given the task of providing a reflection on what it means to be a Christian sociologist. I have chosen to focus on Raymond G. DeVries' chapters in the book, The Sociological Perspective. First, I will discuss his perspective, then start to add my own thoughts. I hope I'm able to provide some valuable insight and encourage you to ask more questions. Enjoy. Try asking someone, what is your worldview? You might get some people confidently answering right away, or some that will have to stop and think. For most, by identifying with a worldview means they must take a stance cognitively, morally, and pragmatically. What I find worth pointing out is what DeVries mentions is that bias will form based on the worldview that you grew up in. This bias then leads most individuals to make incorrect assumptions on very key topics of the modern age, such as poverty, eating disorders, role of women, and terrorism. As DeVries puts it, what looks wrong to an outsider might actually be very right for those involved. To take a sociological perspective is not to ask what's wrong, but what's going on here. To quote DeVries, sociologists recognize that a given individual is a product not of his or her own biography, but the historical forces operating society. This means that they need to take in consideration multiple societal and historical forces that play a role in a person's actions and even institutions and policies and procedures. For example, when we look at low-income communities being majority of a certain ethnic minority, it's a job of a sociologist to understand that there is something so much more than laziness that contributes to the problem of that community. Even look at the possibility of institutionalized racism. By being able to approach an individual and society's circumstance from a different perspective allows sociologists to begin to try to look at biases and try to figure out the why rather than the what's wrong. According to DeVries, there are three ways that a Christian sociologist attempts to reconcile their own personal bias. The first is compartmentalization. This means separating your Christian life from your sociological life. Even though this seems like a bad thing, their faith leads them to do their work with integrity and also further God's kingdom. The second is complementary. This suggests that there are two ways to learn about God. First, by exploring revelations brought by Scripture, and secondly, investigating God's general revelation in the world. Finally, conspiracy. This view basically supports the fact that they both cannot be more important than the other, but rather Christianity must discipline sociology, and sociology must discipline Christianity. In the earlier quote, this ability to look at society from multiple perspectives and being able to assess it can be a huge benefit to Christians. I want to explore this from a biblical perspective. So the ultimate goal of God after the fall was to bring us back into right relationship. That means with himself, with creation, with others, and ourselves ultimately. This is the goal of shalom. We cannot bring the world community to this without understanding the different forces behind each and every community. So, how do you do this? The Bible through Paul gives us an example in 1 Corinthians 9:19-23. It reads, "Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone, to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that all by possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings." Paul, in his ministry, understood what it meant to embrace the multiple points of views of the different societies that he interacted with, so that he understood why they lived as they lived. This allowed him to reach them at a place of understanding so he could share the gospel with them and hopefully restore shalom in their communities. In this passage, Paul acknowledges his own bias, stating that he's not under the law, or that he's not free from God's law, but under Christ's law. These verses can help a Christian sociologist at least begin to reconcile and accept their own biblical biases when it comes to interacting and studying the world around them. In this passage, we see that Paul, regardless of his biases, still attempts to understand the people around him before he ministers the gospel. Why did I decide to focus on DeVries' perspective? It gives a sociologist a very practical approach to sociology that is not far outside the realm of biblical approach to ministry and bringing about shalom. In fact, Paul's approach combined with DeVries allows a sociologist to have a worldview that's either complementary or compartmentalization to reconcile your own bias. This means there's no issues acknowledging the foundational truth of your biblical worldview, along with allowing you to participate and understand the different types of society's cognitive, moral, and pragmatic actions without pressing your own biases upon them. Paul was able to compartmentalize in order to reconcile his own bias. You can see this in verse 20 and 21, where he acknowledges he's still under God's law. This example can give Christian sociologists a place to confidently begin navigating their own cognitive, moral, and pragmatic approach to life and sociology. I would like to take a moment to talk about truth. In North American society, people have embraced this concept of relative truth, which can be particularly dangerous, and a Christian sociologist can be particularly susceptible to this. As I discussed earlier, DeVries says the very nature of a sociologist is to understand different social viewpoints and then ask the why of each. I feel like this can lead someone to make assumptions that the truth is found in these societies, whereas fundamental truth should be sought out in the Bible. Even to a certain extent, we need to take a sociological perspective or approach to the Bible to understand the culture and the thought process of its time. For example, when Paul says in 1 Corinthians 14:34, women should remain silent in church, this verse clearly has some cultural context to the role of women in the society of the time in the city of Corinth. As at the end of Romans, the chapter before, we see Paul praising women leaders in another church who have successfully grown the church and spread the gospel. However, what remains unchanged throughout the Bible is the character of God and his promises to his creation. By being able to understand the truth lies within God himself and his character allows us to confidently explore other societies and ways of thinking without the fear of questioning whether God's truth is the actual truth or is it just a product of society. If you begin to ask, well, is God wrong here? Then maybe it's a good time to go to the Bible, explore it, dig deeper, ask questions, and look into God's truth. This will also help you to see very clearly the goal of shalom and to implement love and justice in the world, just as DeVries says. So why did I decide to do this video? Sometimes it can be very hard for a sociologist to articulate their viewpoints in a very practical way. Today, DeVries points out that what makes this hard is such imagination is difficult to nurture in a society which is very individualistic. This type of mentality is found deep within Christian circles, and we tend to get very passionate about certain topics, whether they be influenced by society or the Bible. What is worse is we're unable to reconcile our conflicting views between these 2 points, which makes it harder to look at other aspects of society and culture. By being able to clearly express to the public your Christian worldview while attempting to understand the mechanics that make society tick can show the world that God is here for everyone. This paves a way for new opportunities to get back to shalom. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. If this has raised any comments or thoughts or questions, please feel free to put them in the comment section below. Thanks once again, guys, and have a great night.